Namaskar and thanks for joining us on this week's Economic Brief, our weekly program on news from the worlds of business and economy, both local and global. On the program, the National Monetisation Pipeline sees potential of 16.72 lakh crore rupees from asset monetization between FYs 2026 to 2030. The US Supreme Court strikes down Trump's emergency tariffs, 175 billion USD in refunds at stake amid corporate lawsuits. China tightens export curbs on Japan's defense sector. Rare earth supply chains are under strain. Germany's auto hub, Baden-Württemberg, faces rising insolvencies as electric transition strains economy ahead of the elections. Now, before we move into our top story, let's listen to this soundbite. Digi Yatra, which has helped travelers avoid long queues at airports with more than 20 million downloads of the app, the Chief Information and Innovation Officer of Digi Yatra said that the passenger's biometric data is automatically deleted within 24 hours of flight departure. The app uses facial recognition technology to enable a seamless airport experience. Here's Siddharth Sharma, the Chief Information and Innovation Technology Officer of Digi Yatra, speaking to Tanvi Taneja.
Digi Yatra has changed the way Indians travel, not only in India, in a global scale itself. It has proven that digital identities and decentralized ecosystems can work. So since the beginning, we have around 20 million downloads of the app, and it has been used more than 80 million times across the 24 airports where it is enabled. Digi Yatra is built on a decentralized model, wherein your data stays only on your phone till with the consent you share it with the airport for your travel, and it is purged from the airport also within 24 hours of the flight departure. We are a zero storage, zero database organization. There is no storage. So when it comes to Digi Yatra, it's a consent-based ecosystem. So you should not be fearful of Digi Yatra.
Now let's take a look at the National Monetisation Pipeline 2.0. Coming up behind me, let's take a look at what it is. It's launched on the 23rd of February 2026 and it's developed by NITI Aayog in consultation with several line ministries, about 12 ministries involved, and part of the asset monetization plan of 2025 to 2030. What is asset monetization? Asset monetization is actually realizing the value of underutilized assets without actually disinvesting them, not necessarily disinvesting the asset. So things like tolls, rents, and the like fall into this category where you, and the money is also reinvested into that particular industry or infrastructure. But you know, it also can include partial sale of the asset in terms of equity sales and things like that. Moving on to our next slide. So we're looking at the scale and the targets of this monetization. Potential is 16.72 lakh crore rupees for the 5 years of 2026 to 2030. And 5.8 lakh crore rupees is expected from the private sector investment through PPPs and the like. Now, this target is actually 2.6 times higher than the NMP 1.0, which was of the order of about 6 lakh crore rupees then. So it is actually significantly higher. Now, we see that of the 6 lakh crore rupees from the earlier ones, it was already about 90% was achieved from NMP 1.0. And in fact, the first large-scale asset monetization pipeline in India was NMP 1. So a lot has been learned from that, and hence they have increased the scale of operations in NMP 2, because lessons from NMP 1 are now guiding NMP 2 in its implementation. So we can see that there are 12 ministries involved, more than 2,000 projects, and they cover areas like transport and infrastructure, energy, the PSUs like GAIL, Coal India, you know, Airports Authority of India. Then there are telecom towers, there are warehouses, civil aviation facilities and the like, even things like Bharat Mandapam, Yashobhumi and all that. all fall into the category where asset monetization can take place. Moving on to our next slide. So this also aligns with Viksit Bharat vision for accelerated infrastructure development. As we said, that the money is often reutilized or recycled into. It enables recycling of the public assets for reinvestment. And the ministries, the budgetary outgo also, it boosts their capital expenditure, or the Capex, which is, the government has seen a huge increase in Capex over the last few years, and now it is of the order of about 12 lakh crore rupees. Moving on to our next slide. So how is it going to be managed? There are going to be a core group of secretaries, which is be on asset monetization. This core group of secretaries will see that this is properly streamlined, and it's a whole of government approach, and they get all the stakeholders also into consultation, so it works more smoothly. And the focus will be on simplification and also standardization. So setting in place certain SOPs that will continue to function moving forward. Moving to our next slide, please. What are the sectors that are going to be in focus? Obviously, highways, railways, power, ports, coal, mines, civil aviation, all the big sectors, heavy infrastructure sectors, civil aviation, telecom, tourism, warehousing, urban infrastructure. A lot of money can be brought in from the assets that the government owns in these sectors for asset monetization. In fact, highways, 26%, through tolls and the like, and power, another 17%. These are going to be the largest contributors. Moving on to our next slide. So we can see that there are significant advantages to utilizing this, the implementation and instruments. There is going to be the PPP, which is the public-private partnership model, bringing in the private sector. We see that there are going to be about 5.8 lakh crore rupees that are expected from the private sector. And then there are the proceeds will be credited to the Consolidated Fund of India, as we know that that fund is utilized for most government expenditures. And then it aims to attract also investors to improve infrastructure and operations and maintenance of the assets. So that in a nutshell is a little bit about the National Monetization Pipeline 2.0. But before we move on and let's listen to another soundbite. The Union Minister of State for Health and Family Welfare, Anupriya Patel, has strongly advocated for transforming medical colleges into hubs of innovation, emphasizing that the integration of modern technology, particularly artificial intelligence, is essential in creating a self-reliant and equitable healthcare system. Let's listen to what she said.
We at the Government of India also strongly believe that our medical colleges, they have the potential to become the future innovation hubs of biomedical research. So we must move together in the direction of promoting more and more research in our medical colleges, where our students are studying medicine to become the future clinicians and shape the healthcare of the country. Country's priority is in how we can make efforts in the direction of discovering more solutions to more global challenges that are being seen worldwide today.
Well, we are happy to have with us Anil Padmanabhan, senior journalist, business affairs journalist and columnist with over 30 plus years of experience. Mr. Padmanabhan, how achievable is this 16.72 lakh crore rupees monetization target, which is 2.6 times higher than NMP 1.0? There's also a target, as I was speaking, of 5.8 lakh crore rupees for the private sector.
Purely based on how NMP 1.0 performed, as you said in your introduction, about 90% of the target was achieved. So purely on that, I would presume this has a very strong chance of succeeding. And let's also keep in mind that there are several institutional interventions the government has undertaken over the last few years based on a lot of learnings that they've had. One is Pragati, which is basically the organization headed by the Prime Minister himself, which solves for any infrastructure bottleneck problems. And then you have Gati Shakti, which also tracks in real time on a dashboard the infrastructure investments that are taking place. So Pragati involves the state governments too, so does Gati Shakti. So you can see that there is a holistic approach that has been adopted, and based on the success of the 1.0, now they have scaled their ambitions to 16.72 lakh crore. And the point is that government investment creates a multiplier impact of 3.25. So all told, you're looking at GDP addition of around $500 billion over the next 5 years.
That's wonderful to hear. But you know, how important are government mechanisms like the core group of secretaries on asset monetization across diverse sectors such as coal, telecom and urban infrastructure in streamlining the process?
Oh, very big, Mark. In fact, this has been the hallmark of the governance over the last few years, that the Indian bureaucracy has been primed and activated to deliver across the board, largely because the government has started talking within itself, that is in intra-government conversations. The ministries no longer operate as silos. So I cited Pragati, and within Pragati there is one stellar example which all of us are familiar with, which is the Navi Mumbai airport. If the Chalta Hai approach had persisted, that airport would not have been ready till 2049. It has not only been readied, it has been launched. And you can imagine the opportunity cost that has been saved, and also the benefits that are accruing to the general population because of this airport going online.
Do stay with us, Mr. Padmanabhan, for our next story. We move on to this story about the U.S. tariffs and the U.S. Supreme Court's decision to strike down President Donald Trump's emergency trade tariffs has opened the door now to potentially massive refunds of more than $175 billion. The ruling has also triggered a wave of lawsuits from global corporations and has left importers uncertain about how repayments will be handled. Now, there could be lengthy legal battles ahead, but the outcome could reshape America's trade policy and also redefine the role of tariffs in its economic strategy. Let's look at this report. More than $175 billion in U.S. tariff collections are now subject to potential refunds, following the Supreme Court's decision to strike down President Donald Trump's emergency trade duties. The ruling has left importers and corporations in limbo, as the court did not specify how repayments should be processed. Analysts warn the refund process could be complex and lengthy, but the stakes are enormous for businesses that have paid billions under the now invalid tariffs. Already, major companies including FedEx, L'Oreal, Dyson, and Bausch & Lomb have filed lawsuits seeking reimbursement. They joined thousands of firms that had challenged the tariffs even before the court's ruling, signaling a wave of litigation that could reshape U.S. trade policy. In his State of the Union address, President Trump called the court's decision unfortunate, but insisted tariffs remain central to his economic vision.
One of the primary reasons for our country's stunning economic turnaround, the biggest in history, where the Dow Jones broke 50,000 4 years ahead of schedule, and the S&P hit 7,000, where it wasn't supposed to do it for many years, were tariffs. I used these tariffs, took in hundreds of billions of dollars to make great deals for our country, both economically and on a national security basis.
He argued that duties have generated massive revenue and strengthened national security. Trump also pointed to alternative legal authorities such as Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act and Section 301 of the Trade Act as pathways to keep tariffs in place despite the setback.
So despite the disappointing ruling, these powerful country-saving, it's saving our country, the kind of money we're taking in, peace-protecting. Many of the wars I settled was because of the threat of tariffs. I wouldn't have been able to settle them without. Will remain in place under fully approved and tested alternative legal statutes. And they have been tested for a long time.
The outcome now hinges on two fronts: whether courts will order refunds of past collections and whether the administration can successfully reimpose tariffs under different statutes. For businesses, the uncertainty is real. Billions of dollars hang in the balance, while trade partners watch closely to see if America's tariff regime survives in a new legal form.
The Economic Brief, DD India.
Well, Anit Padmanabhan, senior journalist and columnist, is still with us. Mr. Padmanabhan, to what extent has the US Supreme Court actually curbed Trump's tariff imposing powers? Because what they've done is just said that these don't come under emergency powers. And so does that give the Trump administration actually clarity now, rather than it had earlier, to use for negotiations? We're not able to hear you. Perhaps you're on mute? Yeah. Yeah.
Mark, I don't think President Trump was daunted by the issue of clarity. He's very clear on his intent that he wants to weaponize tariffs, and he did that for the last 1 year. The Supreme Court ruling definitely trips him up, but like we heard him in the State of the Union address, there are other means of imposing these tariffs. So we have not heard the last of these Trump tariffs, as it were, and it will re-emerge in some form or the other. At present, it is of course caught up in a legal tangle, but the last has not been said of it as yet.
Also, Mr. Padmanabhan, billions of dollars hang in the balance. What do you think? I mean, what trade partners should be doing at this time, even renegotiating trade deals? Of course, India has not yet signed a trade deal, but it was largely negotiated before, the Supreme Court ruling.
Mark, what India negotiated was an interim framework. So we have not even reached the second last step of the trade agreement as yet. So in that sense, India is at an advantage because of what the Supreme Court did last week. But having said that, like I also explained earlier, I don't believe that President Trump will let this rest. He will find some other means of reimposing these tariffs. In other words, the issue of tariffs is very much alive. But India does not just see the challenge as tariffs. The whole idea was to get into a trade agreement with the largest economy in the world. It is $29 trillion. America imports 70% of its consumption. So it's a huge market. India cannot ignore it. And the tariffs, the punitive tariffs that the president had imposed up to 50%, has been scaled down to 10% or 15%, whichever it may be, but is substantially reduced. So it has opened up room. Now that is for the export side of it. But there is a larger play about investment, cross-border investment, particularly from the United States into India, transfer of technology. All of these are linked to this trade agreement. So India would, in my view, continue to negotiate for this free trade agreement, and it's also in keeping with its new avatar that it has assumed since 2021, where it has inked 8 free trade agreements with all developed nations.
Right.
And 9th would be the United States as and when it happens. So the idea is that you are securing your markets, you're securing supply chains, you're friend-shoring, and you're enabling your domestic industry to access technology and much needed investment, foreign investment.
We leave it there. Thank you very much, Mr. Anit Padmanabhan, senior journalist, columnist, for breaking that down for us. Our next story, trade tensions between China and Japan are entering a sharper phase. Beijing, in fact, has imposed new export restrictions on Japanese firms linked to the defense sector, putting rare earth supplies and industrial production into focus. So, with both sides hardening their positions, supply chains could feel the strain. Diptanshu Kashyap has the report.
China has ramped up economic pressure on Japan, imposing export restrictions on firms it says support Tokyo's military expansion. The measures target dual-use goods, products with both civilian and military applications, signaling a major escalation in trade tensions and potential disruption to key supply chains.
In order to safeguard national security and interest, China has taken measures in accordance with the law and regulations. The purpose is to curb Japan's remilitarization and its nuclear ambitions, which is entirely justified, reasonable, and lawful.
20 Japanese companies are now on a full export control list, including subsidiaries of Mitsubishi, heavy industries, and other firms in shipbuilding, aircraft engines, and advanced machinery. Another 20, including Subaru and Mitsubishi materials, are on a watch list. Exporters must obtain individual licenses and provide written assurances that shipments will not feed Japan's military programs. The restrictions cover dual-use items and critical rare earth elements such as dysprosium, yttrium, and samarium, essential for electric vehicles, electronics manufacturing, and defense systems. China has previously leveraged rare earths in trade disputes, underscoring their strategic importance to global supply chains. The measures come after Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi suggested Tokyo could respond militarily if China acts against Taiwan and announced plans to raise defense spending to 2% of GDP. Tokyo has condemned the controls as absolutely unacceptable, demanding their withdrawal. Analysts warn the restrictions could disrupt supply chains, slow industrial output, and highlight Beijing's use of trade as a strategic lever in regional politics.
China's economic curves put supply chains, markets, and regional strategy in the spotlight. Japanese companies face potential disruptions, while Beijing signals that it can use trade to shape its defense policy. Investors and industry watchers will be closely watching every move as the tensions between Beijing and Tokyo intensify. In New Delhi with camera person Praveen Sharma, this is the Pranshu Kashyap for the Economic Brief, DD India.
Well, Germany's industrial powerhouse, Baden-Württemberg, is facing mounting economic strain. The state's auto-driven growth model is under pressure from global competition and a difficult electric transition. Insolvencies are rising and small manufacturers are feeling the squeeze. With elections approaching, the economy has become the central issue. Here's the report. And we leave you with this report. Thanks very much for watching the Economic Brief.
Germany's industrial powerhouse, Baden-Württemberg, is confronting deep structural pressure as its auto-driven growth model loses momentum amid fierce global competition and a difficult transition to electric vehicles. For decades, the state anchored the country's manufacturing strength, being a home to Mercedes and Porsche car brands that were for decades synonymous with German manufacturing excellence. But weakening demand across the automotive supply chain is now squeezing small and medium-sized firms, turning the economy into the defining issue ahead of the March 8 state election.
We are of course undergoing a certain structural change. On the one hand, this affects industries and markets. Much of what we did in the past as the number one is no longer the case today. Other industries and countries have caught up, and we must respond and make decisions. But we must also trust in our innovations and promote it.
Baden-Württemberg's slowdown underscores how central manufacturing is to the state's identity and output. The region accounts for 15.5% of Germany's total exports, with industry contributing 38.1% of gross value added, far above the national average of 28.5%. But the state economy shrank 0.4% in 2024. Insolvencies rose 30% to 2,445 cases, the highest since 2010, and unemployment climbed to 4.8% in January 2026, reflecting mounting strain across the supply chain.
I think the economy is going to play a major role because the economy has been very successful for the past couple of decades, and people are starting to feel the effects of structural changes.
With global competition intensifying and the electric transition reshaping supply chains, Baden-Württemberg faces a pivotal moment. Berlin has approved a €500 billion infrastructure fund to spur investments in roads, rail and high-speed internet, but businesses say the real test is how quickly that support reaches the ground. For voters heading into the state election, the challenge is clear. Can the region adapt fast enough to safeguard jobs and restore its industrial edge? The Economic Brief, DD India.